mortgages in this country. Okay? And I don't know how many, it's like trillions worth of but if they renegotiate and reduce the principal amount on the primary mortgage, what's that do to the second mortgage? It means the second mortgage is basically worthless. So these services are keeping people on a treadmill, not renegotiating things because they have a conflict of interest in keeping those second mortgages on their books as if they're going to be paid. There's still a lot of bad money out, a lot of bad paper in the banking sector out there that we actually haven't figured out what to do. So whether the banks are actually not bankrupt or not, I don't know. I mentioned anti-predatory lending regulation. The bankruptcy law used to be that when you went bankrupt, you could discharge or partially discharge your primary mortgage. That was actually changed, and so now you can discharge what you owe on your yacht. You can discharge what the judge can help you discharge your second home, but you cannot discharge your primary mortgage. And people were trying to get this law changed back to the way it was, and the current administration didn't support it. The banking industry spent $4 million in one afternoon lobbying against this change in the bankruptcy law. During the farm crisis, maybe some of you remember that in Minnesota anyways, they had a lender-borrower mediation, right? We had mediators that would go out and meet with the farmer and the particular banks and so on and say, hey, you can stay in business if we renegotiate it this way. Or in some cases they said, you got to give up the farm, right? And we passed a bill in Minnesota to require this for home purchasers, right? To have mandated mediation between the lender and the borrower to see if something can be worked out. We did pass it through the legislature, but it did get vetoed. So there are some things that ought to be done, at least from my point of view. Right now, the reorganization of the mortgage industry, the future of mortgage finance in the U.S. is really up in the air right now. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, of course, went bankrupt and were being kept afloat by government funds, but they're the only people insuring mortgages right now. Right? What they do is they tell the banks, if you make a mortgage under these conditions, if it goes bad, we'll pay for it. Right? It's mortgage insurance. And this comes about in the Depression, right? So 90% of the loans right now are being insured by either Freddie or Fannie. Right? If Freddie, some people are like, let's just get rid of them and let the private market take care of it. If we do that, then there would be no housing market at all currently. Right? There'd be no way to borrow, right? Because who's going to lend on a piece of property whose price is still declining, right? And then who would buy something like that too, which is another, question I get asked all the time is this the bottom? And I'm like, I'm not qualified to answer that question. If I knew, I'd have more money, right? So, but there's people out there encouraging folks to buy homes right now. And it all depends, right? Where you are and what you have. Long-term challenges. I hope that we come out of this thinking more about housing as a basic human need and not necessarily as an investment vehicle. Maybe it's too important of a thing for people to have to be solely an investment vehicle. There are other access modes of housing than what we call fee simple ownership, which is what we pursued. The community land trust model, right? Where land is owned in common and there's a certain amount of money that can go to the owner when they sell versus the community. And there is always the need for rental housing. Even at the peak of home ownership, so-called home ownership, borrowership, I'm not sure, that there's always been a need for rental housing. Right now it's very interesting because the vacancy rate of single-family homes is at a record, and the vacancy rate of rental property is at a record. And what this means is when we figure this out, there's between 1 and 2 million households that are missing that should be occupying housing units. Where did they go? We can only surmise that they're living with relatives, they're homeless, they're doing one thing or another, but it's kind of humbling in the era of the internet and all this high-tech stuff that 1 million people can evaporate in our country, and it's hard to figure out what happened to them. Right? And I'll come back to my beginning point and leave you with that adequate and affordable housing is essential for physical, social, and economic well-being, and that's what we ought to maybe try to be mindful of as we think about how we're going to work our way out of this.